Hey, Saretsky here. As always, a Canadian real estate market update with a particular focus on Vancouver. If you get any sort of value or entertainment out of these videos, all I ask you to hit thumbs up and subscribe. Questions, comments, put those below. I want to frame up this week's video first and foremost, touching on some economic data, inflation data, etc. Obviously, everybody's favorite hot button topic: inflation, deflation. I want to quickly touch on that, and obviously getting into some housing and obviously again how this is all going to frame up for the election as we get closer and closer to the federal elections here later this month. But first and foremost, some of this sort of narrative that's been happening is that, okay, inflation's running hot. Central banks are going to start to, taper. They're going to start to taper their asset purchases, their QE program, and eventually, hopefully, we're going to get to this this fantasy of normalizing interest rates. Well, we now have a situation in Canada anyways where, second quarter GDP just came out. It was revised. It was revised to show that, GDP's economic growth in the second quarter of this year actually contracted on a quarter over basis. So from the first quarter to the second quarter, GDP contracted. And if you, annualize that on an annualized basis, GDP contracted at 1.1%. Not really a great number as you head it, if you're the Liberal government heading into an election, when you've got a situation now where inflation is running at a 10-year high officially, and that's per the CPI, which again, you could argue is perhaps an underreported statistic. But anyway, CPI is running at a 10-year high, and you've got GDP actually contracting. That is the definition of stagflation. Basically is high inflation. So you have higher consumer prices, but basically no economic productivity, no economic growth. So no growth, but higher prices. So basically, really a lose-lose for everybody. Not an ideal scenario. So, you basically what happens is if you continue to get a situation where inflation starts to increase, and sustains itself, but economic activity remains basically where it is with virtually no growth, it puts pressure on the central bank. What do? Do we try to hike interest rates to sort of quash inflation, but at the same time, how are higher interest rates going to actually benefit economic growth? All you do is you hit over-indebted households, over-indebted corporations with higher debt servicing payments. That doesn't actually help them, consume more or invest more. In fact, it just basically takes away excess capital to ultimately apply to servicing those debts. So if you're the central bank, you're actually kind of stuck here. This is a terrible scenario to be in, but you kind of have to just leave it as it is. And so, I'm watching inflation. I think there's a lot of very intelligent people on both sides of the camp. Hey, you've got, inflation or deflation. If you've got an economy that's contracting, then naturally you would think that inflation should start to subdue itself. But when we start to look at what's happening really globally, it seems like a lot of these things aren't going to be transitory. If you look at the global shipping costs, right? Those are running at all-time highs. You've got major corporations. The one that I'd like to highlight here is Taiwan Semiconductors, TSCM on the ticker. The largest chip manufacturer in the world, coming out and saying that they're raising prices by 20%. What world is this corporation in the next 12, 18 months just gonna start cutting their prices? Like, once those prices are introduced, it's very hard to actually then reduce them later and have outright deflation. So I just think that these things are what seemed like transitory, similar to COVID, right? Hey, it's going to be transitory, it's going to go away, we're going to reopen the economy, and now the return to office is being delayed until the end of 2021 and into early 2022, and again, this is starting to look less and less transitory. Ironically enough, we actually had another data point here, just in little old Canada. If you look at the farmers, the farmers price index, this is basically the price that they are able to receive, for the goods that they produce. That index is up 24% on a year-over-year basis. So, if you look at it today, according to Stats Canada, and the government here, food inflation is running at about 1.8% right now in the CPI, and yet you've got this farmers price index running at 24% year over year. So if you ever were wondering, if you're being lied to or if there's some miscalculations in the CPI, I think this is a pretty good case. But hey, maybe you know what? Maybe that 24% year over year is going to result in higher food costs, and that will maybe it will eventually show up in the CPI index. Maybe some point down the road, these will translate to higher food costs according to the government. But I can certainly attest to anyone that's actually shopping, for groceries on a regular basis, that it is in fact food costs are rising significantly. So again, let's wait and see. I'm in the camp that I don't think a lot of this is transitory, but at the same time, I'm not necessarily convinced that hiking interest rates is going to fix global supply chains. But anyways, we're in basically this market where you have this sea of liquidity sloshing around, and that's finding home in terms of higher prices, which again we can obviously see now if we translate back into the housing market that it's more of the same, right? And we come back to this, what we talked about in last week's video, which is you've got a government which is calling a snap election, when again you look at these these inflation metrics. You've got a situation where you've got inflation again running at that 10-year high. You've got GDP contracting. Not a great environment to call an election, because I think people can kind of sense that, hey, yeah, GDP ain't great, and high prices. Again, you go to the food stores, right? You look at the farmers price index. Like, yeah, these commodities are up a lot, and it's sort of chipping away. And moving forward into the housing picture, we just got some of the August data here for Vancouver and Toronto particularly, which are obviously the two major markets that everybody's focused on. If I'm looking here in Vancouver, sales up a meager 3%. Like I said, you're getting to a situation now where base effects are going to be hard to beat. So you're probably going to see sales contract on a year-over-year basis here moving forward. But the reality is that at the same time, you have new listings, again, coming in at, more than a decade low across the board. So if you look at it today, you've got inventory really at the lowest levels, and particularly what everybody's looking for, obviously, single-family homes. So, I throw up this chart here from my buddy Ben Rabideau with Edge Analytics. Single-family housing inventory in Greater Vancouver, again, the lowest we've seen. You flip the charts and you go over to look at Toronto, lowest inventory we've ever seen. So in terms of, relief coming to home buyers over the next, 2 to 3 months, there doesn't seem to be any sort of reprieve. You've got activity that's pulled off, but at the end of the day, if there's no inventory to buy, why? If I'm a seller, why would I cut my price? I'm the only house on the market. I ain't cutting my price. And that's kind of what we're seeing right now, is you're still seeing, intense competition at the entry level. People basically struggling with obviously housing affordability, very little product coming to market. So anything that does come into market still gets 5-6 bids on it. And so that's kind of the market that we're moving into here in the fall. Obviously, that's going to be, again, important for these elections as we factor in everything that I just told you today, which is, listen, supply chains I don't think look like they're going to get any better. So that means that, is this inflation really going to be transitory when you have structural issues with these supply chains? So is that inflation going to be transitory? You've got a situation where housing continues to be plagued by low inventory with, very little light at the end of the tunnel. That's going to be a continued problem. So I feel like this sort of this angst amongst society is certainly building. More lockdowns. But we'll wait and see. Again, I'm pretty focused here, doing a lot of media interviews on this election, covering all the policies. As I've promised, we will cover housing here in depth of all these political platforms. But the one thing that I will leave you with is someone somewhere site. I'll link to it below. But there was actually someone did the research on how many MPs, members of parliament, own rental properties, right? So it's like, might be good to know, because at the end of the day, if anything's going to change for the housing market, it has to come from them. What they actually were able to determine, that 27% of MPs are landlords. They own rental property. So you've got 27% of MPs that are in fact landlords, and again, that doesn't include, maybe they're not landlords. The other, what is that? 73% aren't landlords, but I'd imagine that the bulk of them certainly at least own their primary residence. So you have 27% that are landlords plus whatever percentage owns their own home. So in terms of bringing in a meaningful policy, that I think people have this idea that, hey, if politicians could just hit the reset button and push prices down 20%, boom, call it a day, hit 20, and then then let go, that will bring everybody some reprieve. But again, that's just not how it works. Nobody's getting elected on killing housing, killing GDP along with it, and of course impacting their own rental portfolio. So anyways, I'll be watching that as we move forward. But that's all I got for this week. We should be ramping up here as we get into post Labor Day. Back to the grind, back to the full swing. People getting back to their regular routines here, and the housing market should hopefully finally see a whole bunch of listings coming on in mid-September onwards, which will hopefully start to alleviate some of this housing supply crunch. But it's going to take many, many months to build from record lows. Anyways, we'll see you next week.